It's getting past.
All right, we'll call the meeting to order. It's a small meeting today. We're voting on the work meeting to handle a couple of important tasks at hand. Housekeeping, I guess, if you will. More than housekeeping. Doesn't look like we'll have any public comments, and so we'll just move right into the minutes. I have no comments or corrections about the minutes.
Same here.
Do we have a quorum? We did four. Four is good. Four is okay? Yep, as long as nobody goes to that one. What is the total board size supposed to be? 7? Or 3.5 if we can get a half a person. I need babies in there. Morning, Reed. Morning. So let's make a motion then.
I'll move approval of the minutes as drafted.
Yes.
No.
Should
lower that. All right, then we'll move forward to approve the minutes. Approved. A. Say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. The minutes are approved. As a matter of question, we had to end the meeting with a recommendation on that Redmond Road CSWD project rather than a vote. Was that sufficient?
Yes, that's sufficient. So basically, the rundown I got from Matt is with pre-application, you're just making recommendations to the DRB. Those are non-binding as is. You know, the pre-application is a decision to move them forward to the discretionary permit review. And so, you know, ultimately it's up to the applicant to address or not address those recommendations. And because there's another sort of round built in a review after we have the HDA complete, it wasn't necessary in this case to have the formal motion. The consensus of the commission is sufficient to put those recommendations forward to the DRB at this stage of the process.
Interesting.
But that's a great question.
All right, and I mentioned that 1910 map. My son loves old maps, and I mentioned that, and that's an interesting resource that the town might have.
Which is it, the 1910?
At the end of that pre-app.
Oh yes,
the map of the old farm roads.
Yeah,
that's just that would be a pretty wild resource to think about using more of in the future. It was pretty cool.
If your son loves maps, I have this not linked here. So this is USGS map search tool.
Oh yeah.
And basically you look anywhere. So I have this up for the CSWD transfer station here, the parcels here, and you click on the map, and what it does is it pulls up a record of all of the different historical USGS maps that have been digitized.
No way.
And you can show them and overlay them. So this is the first one that comes up in this database, the 1906.
And this is free?
This is free.
Wow.
Yeah, you send us all that link?
Yeah, so this is the 1906. There's that first farm road that we can see. And then we can kind of move forward in time. It has a bunch of repeats because they're different editions. So theoretically there could be minor changes, but jumping down, like 1944 is the next one that kind of has a substantial update.
What if it's still on there? 40s.
I think it is. Yes, it's actually changed, which is interesting. So yeah, they showed 2 structures here. Not entirely sure, but that's about the LiDAR signature didn't capture any change, you know, or anything that would put the structure down the hill. So sometimes, you know, there could be inaccuracies or these aren't necessarily surveyed. Right.
Different location.
Yeah, that's possible as well. One could be a barn.
So do we think that main road, that's Redmond Road? Yeah, okay, so that's cool, man. That is super cool.
By 1948, that is gone. You can see this map is still showing buildings and major roads, but it appears that the former agricultural road is no longer a through road. But you can see that this has been mapped as open. So it's in succession probably, or it's an abandoned field, and that tracks with the 1937. Actually, sorry, this was the. I still have all of these pulled up. Is this it? Yeah, this is the 37. This is a map tool, so it's a little glitchy because it used to be a slider that allows you to compare the 1937 to the 2018 data, but it appears to have not been maintained, and so recently the 2018 data disappeared.
There was one just like this with the area photographs. There was one on a story map.
But here's the 1937.
Someone on the conservation website does a story map, and on it is a slider where you can go back and forth between like 40, 46 and 60 something, 46 and 61 or something. And you can see the differences. We used it for Wildcat Williston to talk about Catamount and the way that the landscape had changed.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah. That is very cool, Dave. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I'll send it.
Please. Yeah. That's a
Wow.
real map geeks here.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'd be
very neat to see.
Great. Let's move on to the updates. Dave has been settling in and getting busy. So we've got four big projects.
Yeah, so things are moving along with the number of items. So the bridge repair, the site visit was able to happen finally with both the engineering team, and then we brought in Josh Ryan of Timber and Stone, and Josh was the one who did the repair or sort of rebuild of the surface portion of the structure back in 21, I believe it was. Yeah, and so he's got some familiarity with that site and kind of an understanding of history, which I think is really beneficial. And so they looked at it together, and Josh's assessment was he thinks he can actually keep the price tag of this project comparable to what was proposed over a year and a half ago, which is really great to hear. He also thought in terms of timeline that in his mind, the optimal timeline would be that what needs to happen during the growing season this year is that the supports need to be changed out. The engineering team and Josh have been talking about replacing the existing supports, which actually predate the rebuild. So they didn't replace those. Those are from much earlier. So they're not going to replace all of them for the portion of the bridge that's still in fine condition. But the portion that was undermined, their aim now, they have to get permission from the state wetlands and stream alterations folks in Army Corps, is to get some equipment down into the stream so that they can install some significantly more heavy duty supports that would go down deep enough that they can withstand some surface erosion. Because the good news is that the erosion that did happen, it's not incised very deep. It did clear out all of the surface material, but it cleared it down to the level of the stream. It's not cutting in deeper and deeper. So with that in mind, if they can get equipment down there, they should be able to bury supports deep enough that they can withstand some of this shifting stream beds and accommodate a rebuild of the surface structure on top. So that's the news I got. Engineering Ventures is still working on the design, and they did discuss potentially trying to redo the alignment in some small way to minimize the amount of distance that has to be fully spanned without contact with dry line on either side. But that remains to be determined. So we're still waiting on the design, and then of course the permitting is, potentially more than it was previously because they are still hoping to do some kind of armoring, potentially introducing some fill to the stream, and that's what triggers these requirements for permits, and they're hoping to get the equipment down there. So those are the sort of wild cards about timing. But what Josh was saying is the limit to when you can work in streams is around the mid-October, I believe. And after that, you've got to, I believe you can't do any digging. Either that's a statutory requirement or it's just because of the season, the expectations the ground will freeze. But he said if he can get down there and get the supports in by then he can actually come back after that and reinstall the surface structure later in the fall or even in the early winter. So we'll see what happens with timeline ultimately, but that's encouraging. It sounds like we may not have a repair done this summer, but at least things are moving forward. At least we have this optimistic news that hopefully when the design does come back, it's not going to have a price tag that's ballooned out of the reach of what was already approved.
The permitting, how long will that take? Presumably, this group will have known how to navigate that process, and they know what construction processes will need to take place to streamline the approval.
Permitting, I think it's a good question. I think what can take time with permitting is when designs are not entirely finalized and preliminary, and going back and forth with permitting, and every time you're trying to get in touch with the folks at the state agencies, they just have a wait. So back and forth. But if they have an approved plan and it's very clear about how much bill they're hoping to introduce, what the parameters are, and hopefully they should be able to get an answer pretty quick. Army Corps has already written back to say, we looked at this a year and a half ago, and unless you've changed significantly, we probably don't have to revisit the site. So that's good news. But wetlands did say we do want to visit the site, and they previously hadn't. So swapping one regulator out for another in this case. So remains to be seen. My perception is that if we can limit the back and forth, that permitting can hopefully take place in the span of a month to 2 months time, but that's a guess.
Okay. And how soon do you think that they'll get that design ready where you can start showing it to the permitters?
I don't know.
Okay.
They've definitely been working on it, but I've been checking with them kind of bi-weekly or so, and they have new ideas. They're moving. I just don't have a sense of how quickly they're moving. So, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Sounds good.
What about the interim you were talking about, potentially removing a section? What did they think about that idea?
So I didn't actually get to raise that with them when they were able to schedule the site visit. It was a time that I couldn't be present for more than 5 minutes, so I just went out there to meet them. But I figured it's more important that they go ahead with the visit and get the information they need than I actually be there. So I figured I'd hold off on that for the time being, mainly to get a sense of what their time is. Because if the answer came back, okay, we're not going to be able to do this for a whole another year or something like that, then I think I would want to move forward with that. For the time being, until we have a better sense of timeline, I would say it's probably not worth it to talk about that, especially if they can start by the end of the season.
I mean, it didn't sound like it was critical to say that like this thing's unsafe and it's going to collapse at any minute. So fully taking out those sections doesn't seem like it's going to pose an immediate safety hazard, right?
TBD.
Okay.
I mean,
It's not like it.
I think the safety
I
hazard.
haven't seen it.
The safety hazard is real. I think
even just people falling because if it was dark out
right?
and you didn't, it goes like, like twisty twists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as long as we are replacing the signs periodically and being consistent about the language, it's kind of the best we can do in terms of liability concern of the town.
Yeah.
But in terms of hoping that nothing bad happens to anyone because the bridge is in disrepair, I would love to be able to keep people off it, but I just don't think that's the case.
Because two things came to mind. I walk by it and I see people coming out. I'm like, So one was, how people put up, home beware of dog or home, right? Like they're not there's or home protected by security system, even if it's not. You even put in the sign like, bridge closed, monitored by camera. Even if it's not real, it can keep people are like, oh, maybe I should at least not vandalize the signage. Like maybe they go past it, but at least not like vandalizing things, taking down signs. That was one thought I had, and then another was, I imagined like just using, and this is silly because it is, but using cheap lumber, like just making a new bridge on top of the broken section with just cheap lumber, so that at least they're walking on a level surface if people cross it. But that just encourages people to cross it. So, yeah. Never mind.
So I had a quick question. It sounds great that the price may stay similar to what the previous estimate was, but has that already been allocated, or will we have to go seek permission to spend that eventually? Or?
It's already been allocated. So
That's
there was 55,000 was approved from ARPA funding, and that's in a capital account.
Yeah. Okay.
So that is allocated, and I think because the good news, right, is because the price isn't expected to go up dramatically. If we did have to find some extra funding, hopefully it would be in a reasonable amount that we could pull out.
$2,000.
Yeah, of a line budget. It wouldn't necessarily need to go.
So that's promising then.
That's promising.
Once we get all the permits, it's a go.
That's promising.
That's reasonable.
Well, it's
Great.
relatively encouraging if they,
Yeah.
at least they got out.
Oh, and there did not appear to be any dramatic new changes to the situation after the last rains. It is a dynamic situation, and because of unfortunately, because the way the river bends, it's bending towards the structure, so it does continue to eat into this
platform.
exactly there, because it's a concavity in the bend, and that's just what rivers do there. So that is still eating away at some of the sediment that is supporting existing supports, but they should be taking that into account regardless. And that the recent rains did seem to change that dramatically.
It's after a more than 90-degree turn that the water comes to where the observation platform is. So I feel like the water's slowed down in that spot. It's like an eddy, and then it keeps going downstream. So at least it's not, I don't know, one of those places where the water's like diving and really cutting out.
It's also one of the most energetic places in those turns too. So it just means they can sort of change path. And then, I don't know if anyone
Why big storm?
Mills River, the riverbed completely changed path over the winter. Where the river used to be is now basically like a dead pool, and it's rushing in a all new spot, and could happen here in any moment. Bigger river.
Right. Also in Allenbrook news, we
Actually,
spoke to a gentleman, Mike Grablin, who's a landowner that owns this residential property, and it's also attached as a parcel to this 2 acres of wetland.
Wow.
And here, this is Lefebvre Lane. This is a private road that gives access to this little residential area right just off the village. And so Mike reported that it had some beaver activity, and they've got some chewing right in this buffer. So a tree had gone down, and the neighborhood association had asked him to clean it up, and he obliged and got out the chainsaw and removed that tree. And so he came in to ask about the beavers and kind of what the situation was and what his options were as a landowner to potentially control the beaver activity. He noticed that there were some dams going in. And so I went to check it out and went down the main stream of the Allen Brook and didn't notice any activity. And what I noticed so this area is all big wetland that slowly drains out. Here, what is probably a road ditch at one time along the side, and so this drains out and meets up with the main branch of the Allen Brook, goes under a large culvert, and flows directly into the brook system that we all know very well from monitoring the beavers. And so perhaps it is the exact same family that's been moving up and down the river, or perhaps it's a young beaver from that colony that has recently dispersed. But there's definitely one or more beavers that are setting up shop here. It's relatively new, and they've got a dam in the works and a couple of small check dams, and looks like they're starting to generate activity in the area. So my assessment for Mike was, I took a look at what was going on, and the water level of that dam was about, I estimated 1.5 to 2 feet below the road. And because this is a pretty large open wetland, I did not assess that the risk of flooding was particularly high, because in order to raise the water level by 1.5 feet more, the water is draining out. It'll drain out towards the center of this wetland long before I think it goes up over the road. So that was my initial assessment. So I told Mike, from what I'm seeing, that trees down over the road is probably the nuisance that is at play here. And I took a dive into the state kind of regulations on beaver control for private landowners, and noted that private landowners are legally allowed to trap beavers, control population on their own land. It's also private road, so the town doesn't have any special jurisdiction over it. But I gave him my recommendation, told him I didn't think anything particularly needed to happen at this moment, other than perhaps taking some proactive measures to protect those trees with wire, and to continue to monitor the situation.
Yes, protecting street trees with some, large gauge wire would at least take care of the hazard for people.
Right. And most of these aren't planted street trees; they're aspen, willow, early succession trees.
They're gonna probably love.
Exactly.
Make sure he cuts down any trees as he feeds into the beavers to keep them fed.
So Mike seemed satisfied with that, and was happy to acknowledge the new neighbors, and then nothing needed to be done at this moment.
Did you share the documentary?
I told him about that, and so yeah, I told him about the documentary, and so yeah, that's the situation. That'll be something to watch over the next couple of years, and Mike does have information from the state about the names of trappers in the area. So if at any point he felt as a landowner that he wanted to mitigate the size of the population, have someone go in and do trapping, he's perfectly within his landowner rights to do that. But in the meantime, I don't think there's going to be any dam busting or anything like that. So that was an interesting case to bring up, and especially since it's relevant to our local beaver population. So the commission was aware of that. And also, in the course of that conversation, Mike mentioned that he really has no need for these 2 acres of wetland that have no use to a residential landowner or really commercial. There's no particular use other than wetland values and conservation values. So
more or less, undevelopable.
Right. He mentioned in passing, that the town were to take them off his hands,
Probably not a large tax contributor, but
plus there's no need to do it because you can't develop.
It doesn't come up on the ERF map it comes up as low priority. its size, its the fact that it's undevelopable. But I figured I'd just
Now, who owns that
mention
other
this
bigger
circumstance.
chunk to the right? It looks like a big lane on a little.
It's gotta be the farm,
So let's see, for whoever is in this map that we have pop-ups, I think they've been enabled.
Yeah, it must be the farm. It looks like there's no other signs in return.
So let me skip
Additionally-
over this one.
Shaping reports that the Beaver Dam just downstream from Old Stage Estates is no more. Whether humans or rain washed it out.
Mhm.
So things are changing week by week, where they are, where the dams are.
That one didn't pop up.
Isn't that where the farm is?
Yeah, that's. Yeah, it's just to the
it's
west.
to the west of the
cemetery.
cemetery.
Okay, so this is Highland, Travis, and Stephanie. 8297 Williston Road.
Yeah. Michelle has something that has to lean back.
Yeah, residential.
Can you click on the one to
The
the
one that says 1A.
Here.
Yeah, that one, that's the one that has like the Kubota tractor out front, and has all the equipment and.
But there's a.
Yeah, which one is the cow farm?
This is a.
Oh, the cat farm is further down.
It's further down.
Yeah, we're not to the.
Yeah.
Is that a different cemetery? Then there must be.
There's the farm.
Oh yes, there.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize there were two
There's this large
cemeteries. Yeah.
cemetery here.
Yeah,
and a large-
okay, that's the one I was thinking of.
I believe this farm is a conservation easement.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's the Johnson farm.
Yeah, but it's on the chunk of land on the other side of the interstate.
Exactly. They have there, and then
Sugar
they
maple
have all
production.
that. Exactly.
Yeah, we've got like 100 acres in there or something.
It got broken up by the highway going through, and that's one of those spots that Laura was talking about, where there's an underpass. There's a culvert.
So does this family use this?
Yeah, they sugar it.
Sugar.
I've actually walked it.
There's a hayfield in there too. I believe.
There's a hayfield, there's a sugar house, small sugar house, and then a bunch of sugar bush up above it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any conservation on the north side of the interstate,
Yeah.
but I could be.
No, that's great to know. All right, so I want to just be mindful of time here.
Yep.
We have a couple more minutes, but I thought that was an episode worth relating to the commission.
And is there any upland areas where the beavers will continue to like migrate into, or is that going to be the end of their potential habitat?
I mean, that's a great question. I think what we're seeing in Allen Brook is that, you know, with seeing large diameter trees getting chewed and the beavers moving frequently, I think we're seeing that there is a limit to the quality of habitat in the brook, and it can support these beavers, but they are moving every couple of years or sooner because of this storm. I think they would have stayed happily in that spot just south of the bridge if it wasn't for the fact that that dam was broken up, which is too bad. But I think right now what we're seeing is, you know, they're testing out. They're either dispersing, which is normal for young beavers, or if it's the family moving as a unit, it would probably be because the habitat is in any given area they're kind of depleting the readily accessible resources. I'm not entirely sure if I buy that because there's a lot of good young trees, gray birch and willow and aspen all throughout the village park buffers that they still have access to, but we are seeing a lot of them, so that could be one of the explanations.
Is that a man-made pond or is that a natural pond?
I don't know.
It looks like a golf course.
I think
Is that
that's
part of the Gulf?
well in. It may just be kind of a wetland depression at this point.
Oh, that's what.
Yeah, I think it's probably.
Is that it right there?
Yeah, I think that's that dark bit is what map was showing. So I think it probably is part of the natural.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bridge was underwater to the neighborhood. That could be a reason why somebody may have removed the dam too.
Oh, back in down in
Yeah.
Yeah, all stages.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So Jacob Krantz
Yeah.
parcel. I don't have update that I can share in public session. But I can say that WBPD and I, Global Foundries, had a meeting, and Global Foundries had, they're trying to wrangle with whether the original idea of having the parking lot and having an easement for access to us is going to work for them in terms of risk management, but they may have some other ideas about how we could still make the circumstance work. And those ideas are very preliminary. So we're going to have another meeting this Thursday to kind of see what that might look like, and hopefully we'll have an update that we can share in public session soon. For now, things are just kind of preliminary. Happy to talk more outside of the commission meeting today.
But they're talking.
But they're talking. Yes,
That's all.
absolutely. And they have been, working with their attorney team and talking through scenarios. And I think the kinds of concerns that they were working through had a lot to do with, corporate risk management. And even if they have an easement trail that's well defined, what happens when people decide to wander the rest of the property off the trail, or things like that. So they were working through those elements that kind of led them to think about other potential options or ways that we can still enable having public access.
So big electric fences and things like that.
That's all the kinds of stuff they're thinking about, like to get to fence off everything.
High voltage fences.
So that's all Sam Jacob Prince for now. So the WBPD, we've had them on the agenda to stop in and talk, but we feel like it's probably efficient to save that until we have something more concrete to talk about. So we'll keep pushing them back, but the conversations are happening, which is good news.
Okay.
We also had, I had a couple meetings with the scouts, and I've had a couple of young scouts who were preparing for Eagle Scout and Williston Troop talk to me about potential projects. One of them was really eager to do trail work, installing puncheon down in Mud Pond Conservation Area. And we have budget for materials with the fiscal year ending at the end of the month. And so I talked to Ann O'Day about muddy spots in this. The student had already been down there to scout out a bunch of spots. So it seems like a project that is within our budget to fund and would benefit, the work that's been going on down at Mud Pond Conservation Area for years. And initially the scout wanted to kind of focus on the east side, and Ann said, well, that's great because it is very high traffic and well loved, but also a lot of work's been done there. So maybe we can get some more attention to the west side where there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think we're going to try to direct the attention of the scouts and maybe do a little bit of the puncheon that he was thinking on the east side.
The east side being where the mountain bike is.
Where the main parking lot is. Yeah, not Mudpole Country Park.
Okay.
The eastern edge of the trail network. Yeah.
What did you point to?
Sorry, that was unclear.
We think it's east and west as east and west side of the road.
Yeah, I was thinking, so with the trail system at Mud Pond, my sense is that most visitors, definitely people who use the full through trail, but most visitors are either parking at the main lot and doing the out and back trail, or going kind of halfway up and halfway back, or people are a much smaller amount of people are accessing from the west and going out to the observation platform here. But that it's actually a relatively small group of people who are transiting the whole trail from side to side and then back again. So I've been thinking about it to myself as east and west because of those access points. So sorry, thank you for asking. I did not clarify that. But the scout initially had ideas about places all throughout these trails where it might make sense to add puncheon based on trail conditions. Exactly. But there's definitely been a decent amount of attention to these trails, especially with the mountain biking quiet connector reroute. So some of those trails are in pretty decent condition, especially in comparison to the west side of the trail network, where there's a lot of disrepair in the boardwalk. That's not something a scout can fix. but Anne identified several punching spots at the start of this trail that need to be replaced. And
Okay. That's actually not a bad spot too, because they can park there in
exactly.
the small parking off of Oak Hill and relatively easily get stuff and materials in.
Yeah. So yeah, it was good to have those conversations. It was great to see a young member of the community come in with a bunch of ideas and a cost breakdown spreadsheet and a presentation. So yeah, it's fun to be connected.
Who was the student?
William Ackerley is his name.
Sounds familiar.
I grew up in a local Boy Scout troop, so it's fun to also engage with Scouts. And their adult leaders also reached out to me and came in talking about conservation projects and what they have done in the past and kind of what their volunteer circumstances look like, and they're just looking for opportunities to get out and clear invasive or work on trails or whatever. So that's a resource that we have to tap into. I'm sure many of you have probably engaged with them in the past, but it sounds like they're eager to help out. And so if we have ideas about projects or areas in the town trail network that need attention, or small self-contained infrastructure projects that need worked on, we can kind of direct that energy towards that.
Excellent. So did you settle on a spot in this area yet, or is
not yet? No. So I just reached back out to William to let him know that we have a budget for materials, and we may, even as soon as this Friday, just go down together for a site visit and take a look at the spots he was hoping to work in, take a look at the spots that Anne identified, and talk about the timeline.
The materials have to be purchased this month, right?
Yep.
So this is the last month of the fiscal year, so it's important to get the item sheet built out of what to get.
Yeah. Fortunately, William's hoping to work pretty quick on this. With the school year ending on the 13th, his availability increases, and the scouts that would help him increase. So they're hoping to kind of jump right in the month after the school year ends. So it kind of works out perfectly with the tail end of the fiscal year in terms of additional trail resources we have.
So Anne will work with them as well, try to find exact places for the country.
So how does that basically just sink holes for the posts and put the boards on top of that, and exterior screws to keep them in place?
Yeah, pretty much. It's very
usually a post.
Yeah, they usually just
lay on the surface.
Yeah, it's 3
like the railroads,
tires. So it's more or less a freestanding structure, but they are sometimes sunk a little bit down into the mud.
To level them, sometimes you have to hit one side of the railroad tie to get it to nestle in.
So they would carry all of
they cut it, carry it, install it on site.
Okay.
It's like the simplest kind of structure too,
Yeah.
which is good, because I know in the past we've had projects where we're like not exactly sure which group to engage with. Like, can the scouts really build that structure? Probably not. We probably need to hire whatever do a PC at a minimum, because they've got professional oversight.
I saw an Eagle Scout project in Shelburne that blew my mind.
They can be very good, right?
It was like a multi-tiered stair structure. I mean, it looked like a lot of man hours went into it. I can either imagine one kid with a lot of energy or a whole troop. It was, check it out. It's like a multi-tiered stair structure.
Yeah.
At the Shelburne Bay Trail.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I think it can really depend a lot on the individual scout, on the support or the advising and support in the timeline, and all the factors really. Budget, how much volunteer power there is. So.
Yeah. By the way, I walked that new Fellowship of the Real Trail. It's really nice. They did such a good job.
The accessible trail.
The quiet connector.
The quiet connector that they had
The bench, everything, and
Yeah, it's really, really, really nice.
it's also wider, isn't it? Isn't that
Yeah.
part of it was kind of like
Yeah,
1.5 times as wide as you typically expect.
I rode it last year. It was really good.
Yeah.
They do great work.
I wish someone would do something about that east side of the trail. The sort of like the forgotten.
This,
No, on the mountain bike side.
Oh,
Over that eastern trail is in terrible shape. It's like trying to ride through a jungle.
And just scholarship to Wells looking for volunteers.
Yeah, I know. We did a bunch.
Get out there.
We did a bunch of trail work with them last year, but none of it was in Williston. They didn't have any volunteer opportunities in grants.
okay, so I'll stop there. I wanted to mention I had those meetings and that mainly get it on your schedule so you're aware of this project, but also so that you're thinking a little bit about, anything you've seen around town in our conservation areas and our country parks that might need attention, knowing that we likely have a source of eager help for some of these projects.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, are there any pieces of trail that we could open up?
Well, the Commons, last year we had a conversation about the Commons Trail, down to, what's that, Pine Ridge, or that little neighborhood, yeah, if you can put it up on the map, so from the Commons, yeah, there we go. So that orange trail, the forested section to the west there is not so bad, but like, then there's a really, the middle section off and then up the hill, we were having trouble figuring out what to do. I think we hire what is it, like that district to clear back from the sides because it was just like crowding in, including poison parsnip, I think.
Okay.
So that's,
Really fixed our minds.
Tim did go out there and mow already this year.
Very good.
So, next time somebody gets a chance to check it out.
I could go.
Go walk it and report back what you see.
Yeah, I can actually get through it by following the dotted line.
Oh, this one?
Rather, yeah, because that goes to my house there.
The other piece I was thinking of too, and I don't know if we have full permission to do it, was going from Five Tree Hill down to Butternut. I know we have some easements through there. And I thought we were, so.
This comes up as desired connection.
Yeah, desired connection.
So does that mean we don't have any?
No.
Well, these are easements.
So you could walk that one.
So I mean,
Easement.
if we have the easement,
So
thought we did.
easement there and presumptive easement here.
Yeah. I mean, that's something we could work towards, because that would be a nice connection.
You're talking about the scouts?
Well, I don't know if they're the ones to do it, or if we had guidance, could they do it, or maybe it's too much.
If they wanted to work on their orienteering skills, that would be something that they could try to do, right? That, like, hey, you're starting from here, you're trying to get to there.
That's
and
part of it. Is that it?
Take
It looks
notes.
like it goes like right on the property line.
Yeah,
Lower
that's
piece.
I'm curious.
And then the other piece, I don't know, that's always a piece that I thought would be great to make that connection over to Butternut. Because there's a lot of activity here on 5T Hill, but if people could move over towards Butternut, it seems like that's a plus.
Yeah, the orange is a desired and the black has.
So does that mean we can't do it if the orange, it looks like there's a piece that's the orange, on the north there.
I think we're good because it connects to the parcel where
Owns this parcel. So we have all this, but how do we make it over to the?
I mean, that's probably only like what?
50 feet or something.
That's not.
No, but I thought you said
That's the
orange
existing
was
trail.
Oh,
That's
that's
the
existing.
yeah, that's the dotted
Okay, so
orange.
that isn't.
Yeah, that's the existing Sucker Brook Trail.
Whose
And
property is this?
that one I think is Boomhauer.
See, this is.
Sure, I guess it's not the, that may
Pretty
not
sure
be the
it's-
one I was thinking of. One I was thinking-
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we do have a gap in that one, I think. Yeah.
I thought,
Yeah, we have
I
a
thought I
first.
got to that road. Is that a private
Oh,
road?
that's interesting. Yeah, it looks like it could be a private road.
Cause that, I guess that's the one I was thinking,
Okay.
it's a shorter piece and it goes right to the corner here.
Mhm.
So we have that one, we got pieces all around it, but basically we need just that little bit from there.
How, I have no idea what the state of the forest is, but like, how is that actually bushwhacked through that? Is that?
We walked up through there, I don't know if you remember, Reed, we
I
did
didn't go.
we did a site visit.
It might have been before my time.
It might have been with this properties they were developing up in here, did a site visit and walked up the hill and such, but. I mean, certainly that's easy to get from there to there, and we walked along part of that too.
Interesting.
But just a quick thing, I'm taking a chainsaw safety course through Vast,
Oh,
so I don't have to worry about the town volunteer forum. I could go up to the top of Five Tree Hill and cut all the invasives down with a chainsaw.
I've done that like 5 times. I mean, over the years, just
Right.
as a, probably not official, but I've cut down some pretty big trees up
Oh,
there
yeah.
too, because to help
There
with
are a lot of them.
viewscape.
Yeah.
Probably needs it again, probably it's been 5 years since
Yeah.
we did it last.
Yeah,
Keep
it's
it-
very, like 2 years ago.
Keep that in mind when Brownell Park gets access,
Yeah.
because I'm sure it's gonna need it, and to reopen any of those backcountry ski drops.
Yeah, if the Vast Trail goes through there.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh, cause you have to be
Has
on
to have
Vast.
yeah, the Vast Trail goes up to the top of Five Tree.
All right, let's move on to the next agenda.
all right. So it's 7:55. Yeah. So I agree. But one thing that I did want to potentially throw on the agenda if we have time at the end when we get to future planning. I can also send this to an email, but yesterday afternoon, shortly before town lost internet access, I couldn't send it to you. The CSWD folks, Greg, who we met with, who's the principal engineer of Krebs and Lansing, who's representing CSWD, sent along a memo from Brad Wheeler, who's the wetland scientist on the project, explaining the class 3 designation for the small wetland that was in discussion.
Mm.
And so the question here was whether, after reading this memo, whether the Conservation Commission still feels that a functional assessment should be done for that parcel, whether this kind of satisfies the questions. So I will hold off on having a read through right now, but if we have time at the end of these last 20 minutes, for example, you could do a read through this and talk about it.
Sure.
Or I can simply just email it to you and solicit thoughts after.
Okay, let's make sure that we do get to the implementation discussion, and then try to save that for the end. I don't know how much this will take up, but we are now 15 minutes late or later. So I wanted to put these back on the agenda because I feel like there was some discussion and not a lot of clear tasks or takeaways, or how would we measure progress developing this, and whether or not we wanted to just leave this to town staff, or if we as commissioners wanted to take on certain responsibilities to this. So that was kind of the point of putting this on the agenda, was making it really clear who's going to be doing what, so that we're making progress. So, Dave, I don't know, maybe if we could start with the orientation packet web page. Did you not have? I thought you had a mock-up link available, right?
No,
No.
I don't. Yeah.
So I think that was one of the key takeaways, that I guess no one on the commission can actually make that page. But I think that we should go ahead and make the page, or at least I guess if we all agree that that's how we want to do it, to make the page and then start identifying materials that we can link to it. You know?
Yeah, I think similar to, I don't know if was asking me at the beginning before, I think based on past things we've done like this, it would be really good to not have staff feel like they have to involve the commission at each, like, all the steps through, but offer, so like, David, I don't know if this is possible, but like, if you're like, okay, over the next 6 weeks, next 4 weeks, we're gonna develop this orientation packet page or pages, and then if you were able to say, like, here are 2 hours, 4 weeks, when any commissioners who want to participate could come and join me in my office or join me in the conference room, and we could iterate on it, get feedback, and look at things together. And that way, in between, you can continue to make progress on it on your schedule, not hamstrung by waiting for us to see it in a meeting or whatever. However, there's still an opportunity for commissioners to give you that feedback outside. The ERF one is a much bigger one. I think that's going to take longer and more iterations, and we probably do need to bring it back to the full group, once or twice throughout that process. But in terms of the orientation packet, I would imagine staff puts that together, and just in order to help you get the feedback you need to refine it, to offer some times that people could settle in and work with you.
So I think that's a great idea, establishing some time like that. One thing that I would say is, as I have, just these first 2 months kind of gotten under my belts, a stronger sense of kind of the full breadth of this position and what the town hopes it can do for many, many, many players. I'm becoming more aware of just the limitations on, or sort of the constraints on my time. Mm-hmm. And so what I think would be helpful is if there's a conservation commission member or members who's willing to kind of take ownership of each of these projects, and I mean, almost even like directing me to do the things that only I can do, but they're also stepping in to organize the components that I don't necessarily need to do on my own. For example, I'm the only person that can create the link, structure that specifically, but conservation commission member can refine the list of what we want to go on it, can review the different documents that exist and decide how we want to include them or not, can write mock-up text for the website, so things like that. Not saying that all needs to be on the commission, but I do think that whereas first I imagined, okay, like ERF updates, great, that can just be an independent project that I run. I'm realizing that the way this job is currently structured, the time commitments are not such that I have the ability to just take on so many independent projects and make measurable progress in week to week without some greater partnership, I think. So that's my thought is, even if that one person who's kind of taking ownership is just communicating with me a lot about this project and making sure that it gets advanced, I think that would be helpful. So yeah, that's kind of my initial thought.
Okay.
Unless somebody's itching to do it, I'd be happy to partner with you on the ERF prioritization stuff. I did it with Melinda 5 years ago, and I kind of geek out on that sort of sort of thing. Thanks. I'm less excited about working on orientation, not because it's not valuable, just because I'm excited about that as much. I'd love to see it done.
No, that's helpful. I can certainly help with the orientation package. Recent member, sort of knowing what would have been useful or helpful to know. So that sounds fine. I think both of them sort of carry high level of feedback from the commission, obviously. Like the orientation packet, especially given I was just confirming in the minutes from last week's meeting, Eric had dropped some previous suggestions, right? So that there's some good thoughts behind the sort of we're exploring. The ERF obviously had a prioritization map developed a couple of years ago. I think recently we've been talking about what are the sort of changes to that prioritization map. But yeah, both do sort of seem like pretty independent, but important, and therefore one person shouldn't be assigned both of them.
Or addition pack, whatever you want.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. One thing I had to do when I was first a member was whenever I was looking at anything, I had to look up, okay, class 1 wetland. I had to look up the definition. I had to figure out, okay, what does that mean? So something like having those definitions
Wetlands and buffers and
orientation, wetlands, buffers. The other thing I did was
lots of
ERF. Okay, maybe a list of. I could even do that. Like, just what does that mean?
And that's the kind of thing that I think would be especially great coming from the commission, because you all have the experience of joining the commission and being able to immediately identify where the gaps in knowledge were and what would have been helpful to have had. And essentially creating this packet, we're going through the exercise of what would you have wished had been there when you joined that. And so if I mean that can even be something for everyone. If everyone kind of writes down like, what are the tutorials or what are the helps that I wish I had had when I joined? I mean, that would give us a pretty comprehensive list to begin with. That would probably be better than anything I'd come up with on my own.
like pictures. I wish that there had been more like photographs. Like there's a lot of stuff in writing, and you read it, and you're like, I understand it. But then when somebody challenges it, like development review, and they're like, well, but it's not really like this thing about class 3 wetland. I don't know that I can judge based on paper. I would probably want to go look at it and be like, yeah, somebody should come look at this. Or, no, I get why they're saying this is a nothing burger.
Yeah.
It's pictures sometimes are worth more than in multiple paragraphs of text of what a buffer would look like once it's fully grown or when it's planted. Or
There's no pictures in statute.
right, exactly. Yeah, but that's the kind of thing that a job aid can fill in that missing.
Right.
Detail.
Yeah.
Here's an example of a type 2 buffer and what it looks like when it's planted versus when it's
Right.
grown.
Yeah.
Like that.
So last week we talked about the website, we talked about some of the resources, we talked about some of the harder type materials to be added. Like I feel like we've got a pretty strong list of the things. We just need to start organizing. And so I think if one of the commissioners, and I just raised my hand for it, was to sort of make progress on that, I think it would be putting together sort of like these are the materials, put the links in, put this in text, and so like it would just be sort of like drawing out the structure, but it would still have to be implemented.
Totally. Absolutely. And regardless, I'll remain key player.
Yeah, there'll be some gaps right where it's like, we need this, but we don't have it. Can you go find it, David?
Yeah. So exactly, some of those things, and then there are other things that anyone can go find. So I see the ERF project as something that probably it makes sense to maybe start with maybe just the two of us or with a small group and kind of think about how we're going to strategize this. What are the tasks? But I see even as we're talking about it now, I see the orientation package as something that would be a lot more collaborative. And if I compile this list of all the ideas we already have, people can take little chunks and say, oh, here, well, I can write in about us paragraph. I can put together a tutorial on buffers, or I would love to, write a quick explainer about class 1, 2, 3 wetlands or something. Not all of those things have to be written out. Sometimes it can just be a link. But I think there are things that will be more powerful when they're kind of coming from your own words to a new member than simply like, here's the statute, go read it. kind of the distillation of what is actually important to know from this as a commissioner. So some of those blurbs and ideas, and even just going to find information and say like, yeah, here are the 3 links. Let's like put them up.
The other thing I was just thinking of too is that I think we should get this, even if it's in a rough form, available to potential candidates for filling some positions, and then just have it grow over time. You know, it may take 6 months before we get to anything that we want to make super live, but as long as there's a link that's private and you could send to a potential candidate or something saying, here's what we think is important, or at the very least, here's an outline of what we think is important initially, and then we start filling in the details.
So that's a low risk. Like,
yeah,
we can put this out in a rough
week,
and nobody's going to. It's not going to have some earth-shattering effect.
Right.
Whereas the ERF one, it needs to be well baked before we put anything out there.
That needs to be passed by a lot of people before
it'll be slower and longer process with more reviews by the commission.
So do you want it to be publicly linked? I mean, we can have a page that is not publicly linked from any other page. It's still public. It's on the town website, but it wouldn't be easily accessible.
I think it should be publicly linked, and one reason why is because in my head, I also want to be able to access it to reference those statutes, to be able, if there is a live question in whether it's a meeting or just as we're reading through the paper, it's easy to find that link and easy to.
Just as long as we indicate that this is super draft form, this initial thing,
okay,
and there may be some things
Perspective commission
missing.
Need to be
Even I mean, we could make it as draft and not put the link to start. Well, I think that's if I can create, a sub page even for the next meeting and just put a list of some of the things we talked about. I can start assembling some
whatever it is and taking from the notes too we talked about.
Yeah, I think that would be what I think I can commit to, is start thinking through based on the notes, these discussions, and what Eric developed, and where the existing resources are. Just putting together some of the thoughts of the flow of what. Because I definitely do have some ideas that I can work out. So I can commit to that for the next meeting. We should talk about it next meeting later, but so I'll commit to that. On the ERF, I do think that that's a little more tricky, and I feel like we've talked about it in the context of the ERF funding proposal, but that's why I wanted to have it like on this agenda item. I think I'd have to go back to previous minutes to know what we've said about it previously, but I guess that's the open discussion here: is how would we start this work?
I think it's pretty clear in my mind, but tell me if this is what you all think. In my mind, we have identified that there are some factors that might not be taken into account in our prioritization, and we know that things have changed, right? Certain properties have been conserved, others have been developed, so now there's need for that. So really looking at like what's the delta between the map today and the map that we want to have, and then probably we would want to come back with some sort of proposal to the commission, like David and I put together. Like, this is what we think we should do, a work plan of like, first we're gonna try to update this and take that out and whatever, and bring that back to the commission and say, is this we could do?
So that's kind of like why we want to do it. Mm-hmm. We had one from 6-7 years ago. Mm-hmm. But here's the reasons why it needs to be updated. Yeah.
We kind of casually mentioned reasons it needs to be updated, but actually writing it. Like,
I think that'd be
this is what's missing. This is what has changed. Therefore, we should amend the map.
Right.
And here's how.
I would take that parcel on the north side of town next to the Winooski River as like a really good example of, I think it came up between just a back and forth that I remember from last week or 2 weeks ago with Eric, you know, why is that identified as a high priority? It's on a floodplain. It couldn't really be developed in any substantive way. But to Eric, I'm trying to represent his point is that like, oh, but it's, you know, contiguous forest next to a river that if we could preserve all of it, like, shouldn't we? Wouldn't that be a good opportunity for the town? Wouldn't the requirement
The cost be lower because it's not developable, so then
Yeah.
if we wanted to purchase.
And I guess, and my counterpoint to that is like, the town is paying for it, and we have a bunch of conserved areas that we don't have access to. And so my thinking now is that there's a lot of these places that we need access to rather than buying up more areas that we don't have access to. Right? So it's like, I think that we need to have a prioritization schedule that kind of leaves room for both of those options. You know, it's like, I'm very interested in pursuing the easement to Brown Mountain because that's a huge chunk of land with cool history that would be great to like spend my time in.
Yeah, it's a cultural and recreational thing, not just a conservation.
Right,
Natural resource thing.
right. But I can appreciate that if 100 acres or 1,000 acres of riverine property is available, shouldn't we jump at an opportunity like that, or is that something that we really should let the market?
Yeah, I mean, I have a slightly different viewpoint for that.
Yeah,
Because I think if it's undevelopable, we shouldn't invest in it because it's going to be there anyways. And then there's other parts like riparian zones along the river where a farmer is planting within 20 feet of the river. That if we're going to invest money and that will help that, you know, create a 100-foot buffer along the river, buy the buffer.
Yeah.
I mean,
That'd be another approach, right?
yeah, that's another approach. So those are different priorities, but also I think your counter might be, Dave, that well, the rules are going to change over time, so maybe that will be developable in 20 years. So we should invest in it. So there's all kinds of good reasons for doing a lot of different.
Yeah, so I think that initial like reasoning bit is what we first stop was like, let's build the case for why we're even going to change something.
So in my mind, kind of what, and correct me if we're thinking about this very differently, but you know, I see the map that was done in 2020. It had a rigorous process, considered a lot of conservation criteria, and yes, we could tweak it in certain ways, but it probably would not have a dramatic change in which parcels pop up as dark green, which pop up as light green, and which pop up as yellow. Some changing around could happen. The specific order of 1 through 55, you know, could shift around, but it wouldn't necessarily have a strong impact on our day-to-day planning. And that's really what this updated prioritization is about. It's almost like an independent prioritization than the work that was done in 2020. We're looking at that and we're saying, what are the choices that you want to make on top of this prioritization, you know, to
The strategy.
yeah, almost guide the strategy by which you want to proceed. So, for example, in that initial strategy, the way that the quantitative scale works, everything maybe got an equal 1-point bump if it had recreation value. Everything got an equal 1-point bump if it had riparian connectivity through it. But with this strategy that we're talking about developing, we're going to superimpose on top of that qualitative value choices that will guide our strategy. So we might say, okay, let's identify 5 places in the town where we think, you know, just based on our collective reasoning and where we're at today, are very important to make inroads in. So we might pick Brown Mountain. We might pick the Burnett parcel where, you know, it's walkable from the town center, and so we think that is especially important. And those areas might get more focus based on this strategy that you're talking about in terms of, you know, making inroads on recreation areas that would be especially important. We might deprioritize some high conservation parcel areas, or high conservation value areas, if we think that they're especially low likelihood of development because of factors like flood hazard areas, steep slopes, wetlands, etc. So that's the kind of thing that, yes, a quantitative scheme that built our 2020 map can take those things into account to some extent. We can create a map that more meaningfully reflects the opinions on this commission today that would guide a strategy. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
So you're kind of adding, keep the 2020 map, and then here's a whole different set of thinking or priorities that you go on top of that, including the 30 by 30, a lot of things where we're trying to change.
Right. I mean, we might end up looking at it and saying, okay, well, why not? We can tweak that 2020
That's what I was thinking
point
is that
scheme.
if we tweak the 2020 map, I think we're going to find a moderate amount of improvement or change. And then we're still going to say, well, that's not quite good enough. It's helpful, but it's not quite good enough. We need to, like, I'm thinking about the example along the Newski. Like, we might circle that area and say, we do want to focus here, but we're not looking to buy up all this land. This has a different strategy, which might be like buying buffers, or we're going to do outreach to those landowners to improve practices rather than trying to purchase them. So like we might circle it and say, this area is going to have a certain strategy, and this other area, we actually do want to buy up that land. There's a different strategy over here.
Right. I mean, I would see that the value of the existing ERF map is almost passive, because when land comes up for development, when opportunities arise where someone's thinking of selling land, you have a scheme where you can look at that, you can show it to the select board, and you can say, hey, this is high conservation value. There's an opportunity here, let's go. But what we're talking about is something that will help us guide proactive choices and strategies that this commission takes in the moment to try to direct ERF resources to make changes that you want to see made in town. So I almost see it as two different functions.
I do. I think that's right, and that helps keep the riparian zone next to the Winooski as a high priority area if and when a project should ever be proposed in it. But it can be a totally low priority for us in terms of like what are we going to focus on our known ERF dollars today.
Really purchase actually coverage. Right. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
It does. That's a helpful framing, and I guess with that sort of framework, the task for now is, it seems like it would be to focus on what are the conversations we want to have.
David, after size, you and I should have just a quick meeting to be like, hey, what's we going to work on? That'll get us to the next step, and then I can do some of that. Yeah, you focus on the orientation packet for now, because I can certainly at least get the ball rolling in the background. It's going to be a longer, slower process, and we already have, like to your point, we already have the passive tool in place, so it's not a crisis, but you've been emphasizing DW.
The other day.
You've been emphasizing that, even though it's not a specific ask of the community, the fact that we've had a more public request for funding and we've received it, we want to have some sort of update and information available. Say, this is what we're doing about it now, and we did get some more significant funding.
I would almost think that like bringing over to the commission, maybe this can be, I mean, it doesn't have to be much, but just coming up with a list of like, let's have an ERF prioritization about areas that are up for develop or that are like close to development zones that might be like the most at risk. Let's have a conversation about prioritizing public access to known areas and like have those agendas come up on a scheduled basis. And so, for example, just because I mentioned Brownell Mountain, like talk about, have that meeting agenda be a sort of map. We bring up the map of Brownell and we say, okay, what areas provide reasonable access? what's our strategy to have Dave reach out because, to a specific landowner. Maybe that's too in the weeds, but that meeting can literally be just about like, okay, there's 5 parcels around Brownell that might be worth reaching out to. There's 2 parcels near Jacob Grants that might be worth reaching out to. I mean, I have contacts at Velco that I might be able to get more phone calls returned than the town. So if GF falls through, we can start working on the backup to that. So like doing that kind of prioritization might be like one meeting at a time, and then in the next meeting we can talk about like, okay, here are the riparian zones that we want to like flag, but are like probably not going to be developed under current rules, right? Like,
here's a proposed strategy is that some commission wants to put down in writing and work.
and so I would be very open to sort of hearing what you think that order of operations should look like, and maybe that's what the sort of quick meeting is like here's what we should talk about and the order of it and how long it will take, and then at the end, I guess I would like to see each one of those meetings, almost like how we did the town plan, just come up with ultimately like a list at the end of that process.
Yeah, something that the commissioners we can all read ahead of time and come and have a conversation about, like a statement, a goal statement, and a little bit of information about what it is, and then we can come and talk about it.
And I think that's where you would then come in, is that ultimately it would create some kind of like some documentation of those discussions that we can then review and finalize in the fall, right? To say like, okay, this is accurate. This is what we talked about. This is getting it done.
I think that's great. And I would add, since you mentioned the town plan, I think the town plan will actually help us in creating this sort of revised or updated active strategy, because I think some of the, I think it will identify some of those conversations that we can bring right to the forefront. Things like focusing on accessibility and focusing on high development potential areas.
Also, like assessing where we are in terms of budget and capacity to manage the trail miles we have today, and how does that impact our strategy around adding new trail network miles? Like, maybe we find we do want to add, but not this year. It's like a 3 years thing, or maybe we're like, no, we're actually underwater. Maybe take what we're currently doing, so we actually need to focus maybe differently. Maybe we need to abandon some trails that are too much work compared to the benefit they add, in exchange for adding like a Brownell Mountain Trail. Right? We don't always have to add. There may be opportunities to say we've done this for a long time. Is it adding value? Not really. Let's actually put that effort into something that will be a new service.
So the ERF cannot. We've already covered this, right? So the ERF can't be used for type like a trail building capital, right? Like we would have to budget that. But to this point of like we can buy an easement in advance, like we can buy an easement, Whereas right now, if someone came to us and said we want to develop a subdivision and then it's on the map, we can say like, okay, let's extract an easement from them out of that process. The ERF if you have the budget to make a trail, you could use the ERF to say we want to purchase a trail easement from you. Yeah. And then
you're not coming for development, but we're coming to you.
Yeah,
it's not a lot of. Thing is, it's not a lot of money. I think it might be as much as $10, $7 to $10 a foot or something. So if they've got a mile, it does that out of it. But if it's only a few hundred feet or something,
it really comes down to how they view public access and how they view privacy is what we've found, right? Like
I don't think we
put it on a far edge of my property. I don't care if it's the worst possible spot. Some people are like, oh yeah, but people hike through there all the time. I love, seeing my friends hiking, and sure. So,
but we've never, as far as I know, we've never bought trail by the.
I think we have.
Have we?
But I think it predated me.
I don't remember
Melinda that we had.
I know we've had the ability for maybe 20 years, but
yeah,
I don't remember.
I think that would be a great outcome. We could identify a handful of spots.
Yeah,
that we would like feel it out
to do something.
Yeah,
like this connector between 5 Tree and
Buttermilk.
Town
Center.
Center. Now, something else.
Yeah, whether
We also have a pretty good language in some of the development rights that we bought from people about what that means to them. You know, they have the right to shut it down. We do, you know, we work together to alleviate problems that exist. So it's not like.
We also had a good example from last year where we worked with the farmer up on Sunset by the 5 Tree Home. Smoker connection. So I was just to say, like, this is an example of what it means. It means that if you have a change in how you're using your property, you just come in and talk to us and we figure out a solution.
And even prior to that, McKay's that used to own that, there was an issue there. We shut down mountain biking instantly because they were, safety issues.
Okay. I think we can do that.
Okay, I think that gives us a path forward.
Yeah.
And some direction as to what our expectations
So
are.
yeah, we'll schedule, we just kind of explaining back my understanding and next steps for my own benefit. Hopefully, so we'll schedule a meeting, talk about your prioritization for the next steps and conceptual plan. Dave, you're going to put together kind of your high concept idea of kind of what the site could look like. I will kind of type up the list that I collected from last session where we were throwing out brainstorming, so I can send that to you as well.
Yeah, send me an email and that'll also keep
Yeah.
me here and get out of these meetings, focus on work, and then
Yeah, of course.
So send me an email and
I'll send you an email and include that list, and then I'll create a working page where we can start to implement these things.
Yeah, great. Awesome. All right, that sounds good. Yeah, let's talk then, I guess, about this memo that we got, and then I do want to spend some time to talk about meetings. Got some summer schedules that should probably be discussed.
Great. Okay, so let me show the memo. All right, so this is addressed to CSWD staff from Brad Wheeler, and then forwarded to us. Brad Wheeler is the principal at Wheeler Environmental Services LLC.
Is this who we met last 2 weeks ago?
No,
So someone who wasn't on it.
yeah, someone who's not on our call. So
Okay.
Brad is expert wetland scientist, member of the Vermont Association for Wetland Scientists.
So
And
bona fide.
yes, bona fide. So Brad is explaining the designation. So the question here, so I figure we can do a read through, and the question here is, after reading this, do you want more information? Do you still feel like a functions and values assessment of that Class 3 wetland is something that you'd like to see in order to help make further decisions about recommendations for the wetland?
And for reference point, the way they describe that in our meeting is like, this is just a spring. It's a spring.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that water is coming out of the ground. And there's probably a change in the vegetation around it as a result.
Mm-hmm.
But, is it a flowing stream? Is it, no, it's just like, it's probably like a seep, which is what would, in my mind, trigger. A lot of people don't know that I actually went through wetland certification like 15 years ago. And it all depends on the time of year that you're there. But I mean, if that person was there and they saw either lush vegetation or like a clear marker of it, you might not even see the running water. It would just be like an indication of like, oh, there's a sink, right? And so like, right, I get it. It's small.
So having read a little bit from Tina Heath,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of doesn't tell me a damn thing in addition to what we already knew. I mean, basically it says, yep, it's Class 3 wetland, they're not protected. We knew it was a Class 3 wetland. We wanted to know, is it valuable for anything? I think that's what we wanted to know, that's at least, that's what I wanted to know. So that doesn't help me at all. And then they go on to explain, here's what a class 1 wetland does, here's what a class 2 wetland does, here's class 3. We knew all that stuff. I don't know if you feel the same way.
That is the gist of this.
Yeah.
So that's a completely fair reading of it. So, and that's really what this is. I'm not, obviously this exchange it's only one part of it, so it's not clear what they specifically asked Brad to explain, if they were just asking him to explain what a class 3 wetland is.
Right.
But let's continue to read. Does anyone need more time on this?
Okay.
So yeah, some of this is statute.
Class 3 is not class 1 or class 2.
Yeah, and it's not protected. But that doesn't mean we can't.
Well,
Good.
it doesn't provide significant enough wetland functions, and what we have in what we are worried about is we can ask about class 3 wetlands to be looked at if we're worried that they provide functions, but they don't. So maybe we should take that out of the plan. Town plan, somebody put that in there. But maybe it doesn't.
The bylaws, you mean?
In the bylaws, yeah.
What is, so,
I'm saying, why is it in the bylaws?
mhm.
If class 3 wetlands do not provide
By the state
significant enough
definition.
functions. Yeah, but why are we, like, you're probably the closest one to know. We're a class 3 wetland, what is the function?
I think of it as related to the significant wildlife. I mean, if that class 3 wetland does create a different
Salamanders and
Amphibians,
and
a biome for habitat that just sort of is unique or different. It's like it doesn't have to be like a sort of lush expanse of wetland that like birds can nest in, and it can just be like a contribution to that significant wildlife habitat. That to me was the main takeaway, was what I was looking for in that, and like when this project comes back to us is like, Dave was pointing out, you have it in the flattest area, which is mapped as a likely significant wildlife area. Now we're looking for proof that the animals are using it. And so what does that look like? And I think when they do the assessment, they need to be aware that there's probably a seep or spring or a seasonal brook that is in there that probably enhances that significant wildlife.
But when the wetland scientists know that there's class 3 wetlands, when they look at it?
But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the wetland assessor is not doing the significant wildlife habitat assessment.
No.
Oh, okay.
So
I see.
I think
hydrology.
collectively you've cued in on 2 very important things, and the 2 things that are making this conversation slightly difficult to have. One of them is the fact that our bylaw is written in a slightly confusing way. So here's what it says. Class 3 wetlands generally are not protected by state law, but may be protected by this bylaw, and are definitely regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. The DRB may, upon the recommendation of the CC, require that class 3 wetlands with significant functional values remain in their natural vegetation. The CC may also recommend, and the DRB require, that a functional assessment of the class 3 wetlands on the proposed development site be provided along with the delineation. And later in this section of the bylaws, it's stated that in terms of buffers, hard buffers required around wetlands, the DRB may, upon the recommendation of the CC, require a buffer above class 3 wetlands that have important functional values. So
I think that is exactly how I would.
right.
So we have that. So even though it's not required by the state, we can put.
So what's tricky about it is that a class 3 wetland in state wetland rules is defined essentially as a wetland that has not passed the significant functions and values test. Right? So you determine that this wetland is small enough and is not risen to the threshold to be included in the state jurisdiction. And it's not saying that it doesn't deserve protection, which is how this amendment is framed. It's just saying there has to be a threshold. And we're state regulators, there must be a threshold. This is what the threshold is. It's below that significant functional values threshold. No significant functions or values have been identified for this wetland.
So historically, we have protected them too. I mean, we often say, avoid putting that road, even though it's a class 3 wetland, put it someplace that minimizes impacts on that. And we have put buffers in them historically too. I think the other thing on this project that I remember is they had that thing bounded on 3 or 4 sides. They basically just isolated it by roads and paths and buildings.
At that point, it's just going to become a divot, because if it is just
I know.
There's not going to be any water infiltration.
So that's an extreme limitation on it. On any wetland. I mean, if it was 2, we'd say no, you can't go anywhere near there.
Yeah.
But 3 was. I just saw that and I said, wow, it's labeled as a wetland, and you're fully restricting what can happen, other than seepage through it, but which can't be too substantial if it's a wetland.
So the other thing I want to say, so I think the kind of argument coming from CSWD is mapped as a class 3 wetland. That means that it doesn't have significant functional values. Now, our bylaws are confusing because they say, CC can make these recommendations if the wetland has significant functional values, or if it has important functional values. Now, that language is not the same as the state wetland rules, right? They use functions and values. So this is referring to the general concept of wetland function, not explicitly the Vermont wetland rules. And the key part for me in reading this is this, but may be protected by this bylaw, which to me says that the intention of writing in this bylaw is to provide an opportunity to enhance protections for class 3 wetlands when there is an argument for doing so. And that argument has to come from a place of saying, we think this class 3 wetland does have functional values that are important or significant on a local level. Now, that's my reading of this bylaw that is not written entirely clearly. So there is a question of, right, is this completely redundant with the wetland rules, which is what you were suggesting? And there's also the question of the intention of this bylaw seems to be pretty clearly, right, that it's offering an opportunity to provide additional protections for a class 3 wetland when there is an argument that it is warranted.
Through something like that.
Yeah, so I just went out and read the state class 2 wetland description, and the thing that I think is the reason that it's good we do look at it ourselves is that one of the things that they list as says, in addition, any wetland with one or more of the following characteristics will be classified as class 2. And that includes a wetland that contains dense, persistent, non-woody vegetation or prevalence of woody vegetation. Many of these properties that we look at have been paid over and over and over again, and they would potentially have that vegetation if they hadn't been paid over. So a lot of times it looks like it's not a wetland, but if you let it grow in, you're like, oh my gosh, it's a wetland. And so
with CSWD and their other spots.
exactly, it looks like it's just a seep, but if you stop working the land, it turns into a land, and so that's why I would favor requesting a functional assessment.
Yeah, with that argument.
Sometimes you can't see just from is there standing water or if the vegetation is there because it may have been manipulated over time.
Taking this, clearly this land hasn't been touched in 50 years, right? So if it's just a class 3,
But has it been paved? Has this land been paved?
it's forest.
It hasn't been touched since
So this one
at
is
least 48, probably.
okay. So it is forested as much as it's going to forest. So that might change my opinion a little
I still think though that your larger point is made, which is that like in that forested space,
It's what's using it.
it's
Still identifiable.
it's identifiable as something different from like the surrounding woody vegetation. So like if there's something there, do the functional assessment to sort of see if it's actually like real, or if certainly if wildlife is using it to some capacity. And like, so I think if this comes back to us for a SWA, which is really where I view our next sort of point of leverage in this project, is that's and why we have discretionary permit. Yeah, and specifically why we want the power to hire those SWA assessments is because we can tell them, like, please look at this area of the class 3 wetland and tell us how it's being used and whether or not it has a functional value. Because the developer's proposal could pretty much destroy it. Yeah.
Well, what I will say to developers' credit is because it's a class 3 wetland, there really is no. They are supposed to look for ways to protect the wetland, but in many cases, a developer will simply fill it, and there's really no recourse for that because it's a class 3 wetland. They don't have to go back to A&R. They don't have to go back to Army Corps, and so in this case, there has been an effort to avoid it and culvert it so that there has been an effort there that is better than you will find in many projects. That's not to necessarily sway your opinion one way or another, but I do think that's at least worth mentioning here.
But the key is if it had a function, it's going to be gone. Other than just a place for water to then go out and fill. That's my.
Yeah, exactly right.
What would we do with the assessment if we get it? Like, would we actually direct them to change the siting? That's another question.
So the only power that you have from the bylaw is to recommend that a buffer. So they're already technically leaving it in natural vegetation, although they're clearing the forest around it. So that is moot. Right, you've recommended a functional assessment, and you can certainly continue to follow through on that. So the only additional thing that you can do with regards to this wetland is the DRB may, upon the recommendation of the Conservation Commission, require a buffer above class 2 wetlands that have important functional values. It does not list what the distance of that buffer has to be. It simply says that the DRB may, if they agree with the arguments for your recommendation, insist that buffer is there.
Typically, I would imagine we would go with what we do class 2 wetland, which would be a 50-foot buffer, right?
But we've done small too. We've done like 25.
It's the SWA that would say it has important functional values?
So it's really, I mean, this is
HDA. Yeah.
The functional assessment can technically be independent. It's just that HDA, but that was the recommendation from the Conservation Commission that was given to the DRB that was approved. Right, is that along with that HDA or included with that work, this functional assessment be carried out.
Okay.
And that is essentially a checklist that the wetland scientist works down that says, it gives 10 different functions and values, and the ones that would most likely apply to a SEEP are stormwater retention, habitat for amphibians, and
pool type.
Yes.
Yeah, you think of the amphibians mostly.
There are 7 of them at least that wouldn't really stand a chance of applying, such as educational value, recreation value, things like that. But there are a couple, and they check off, okay, does this function exist? Is it minor, according to the checklist, or is it major? And so that's what you would get back, is this checklist. And
I still feel good. Would the HDA scientist be expected to have the skills to do the functional assessment?
Yes.
then I would say
Okay.
it should be included.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want them, because of the kind of events, I wouldn't want them behind a separate study. But if the person's already going out to do the rest of the HBA, I think they should do the checklist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Thank you. This should be part of our package.
Yeah.
What is
So
how
this
shall I
is
say?
the Vermont Wetland
Yeah.
Evaluation Form, summary of functional evaluation. You have these 10 different functions and values. Let me share my screen real quick so you can follow along. Watching.
I'm going to zoom in a little bit.
And it's
That
a
is-
suggestion. Zoom in. Okay, so you have this, function is not present, it's low, it's present, or it's high. For each of these different functions or values, surface and groundwater protection, water storage for floodwater and storm runoff, fish habitat, no.
Unlikely.
Wildlife habitat, exemplary wetland natural community, no. Open space and aesthetics, no. Erosion control, recreation value, education. So some of these are, obviously not present. Some of these could, in order for it to get to the state level of significance, it has to be high. But
The best you might get present.
if it's present, and
We can still recommend a buffer.
you felt there was an argument that in the local context that still made it an important functional value, then my reading of the bylaw is that that is the argument under which the DRB bylaw allows the town to provide this additional protection beyond the state wetlands. So
Big statements.
Yeah, that is.
I do think in the future it's worth kind of pursuing a conversation around language change or clarification of what the, how we want this rule to be structured moving forward. But as written, that's my present, I think, the most logical interpretation.
The words local context is, I think, one of the things that's missing from the bylaws. Like, we understand that the state might not see this little vernal seat as super important, but on local landscape context, we know like a lot we've lost in recent years, and this is actually something that's really important.
That's true.
And you also just have to consider, is providing that 25 foot buffer, or whatever, in the context of that site plan, will that be meaningful?
Yeah.
So a lot to think about, but there's no reason, if the consensus is that you want to move forward with this, no reason not to get the information.
I think also like all of this is really also just raising for me like what is the drainage plan going to be for this site? This is right on the river. It's going to flow directly downstream into the Winooski. I imagine that they have to be considering that. But like this is one of the areas where groundwater infiltration, can happen, and the presence of groundwater is
Even surface water, I guess, if it's not down.
yeah. I mean, like how will they? This is a facility that's going to have a lot of refuse. It's going to have a lot of refuse coming in, and it's going to have a lot of impervious surface space. So what is their not just floodwater mitigation, but what is their runoff mitigation plan? And if they're creating all this impervious space and then they're not leaving room for infiltration in like sort of natural areas, it just kind of raises a bunch of questions for me as far as like the general hydrology of the site and how that puts things like the Winooski River at risk of runoff, basically.
Yeah, it's requiring for them to have a professionally prepared runoff erosion control plan, but it's definitely something that should get some attention.
Yeah, I just think I would like to be aware of it.
So real quick, just to close this out, this is for each of those points that I mentioned before. The scientist has this checklist to fill out. There are different boxes that would mean that the function's present and likely to be significant, or the function is present, but the wetland provides it at a lower level. And so checking these boxes then leads to that determination of low, present, or high. corralled birds. And for such a small wetland, I do think this is a pretty minor addition. So yeah, that's all I'm saying on that, just to save time.
Okay, I'm gonna be out first week. The next meeting is on the 18th of June. Does anyone have any conflicts with that one?
I am out of town June 14 through 21. However, I do have internet and I have in the past from Maine beach. From the beach, you can be. I'm able to be on Zoom.
It's 5G.
Yeah.
It's pretty decent.
I'll be out the first 3 weeks of August.
Okay, so August is looking questionable.
Might we have a new member by August?
Don't know what the timing is on that.
Have they gone for it? Has someone gone for the select board?
I don't believe so.
Do we want to have the July 2nd?
I think the July 2nd meeting is most likely the meeting at which the HDA will be reviewed. So I would say that one would be more.
For this part, the one we were just talking about? Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's certainly the goal. They're trying to fast track this as much as possible. I put out a request for proposals last Friday. We already have one proposal in from Arrowwood, who did the Glazer HDA, which was good.
Yeah.
And
So they're gonna be done by then and we'll have results?
that is potentially, that's the goal. I do not think it could be done sooner than July 2nd.
It's gonna be wet back there.
But that is,
Yeah,
It's gonna be really wet.
Yeah, then I want to fast track it.
but so my sense that, I think we should at least keep that on the calendar for now.
Okay.
Unless it becomes clear that that HDA would not be
I
having.
can do something. Yeah.
So am I done as of the 18th? Is that my last one? Or have that?
A June 18th?
Yeah, I don't know if that ends on the fiscal year for the town. Or
Interesting.
I mean, I'm willing to stay
Yeah.
for whatever it takes
Get
to
somebody
get
else.
replaced.
I mean, at least one more.
If that's
Otherwise, our meetings are just gonna turn into people making phone calls trying to recruit people to apply.
Yeah,
so. I'm happy to. I can be here on the 2nd remotely.
okay.
I'll probably be remote.
Okay.
And what about the July 16th? No issue for me. Okay, so I think right now though, it's, for some reason I didn't put it in my calendar, but I know I'm not the first week. So should we go ahead and say that the August 6th meeting with 2 commissioners absent probably should just be removed? August midsummer break.
August 6th.
You want to use that time and that date to meet David? I could meet that day since I have that time available.
Yeah.
Unless you want to sleep in one day.
I mean, that might be nice too.
All right, so we'll keep the 2 meetings in July on the books. I will flag that if that HDA is not ready, and we don't have any voting topics, July 2nd. July 2nd might be a good one to just give ourselves a break.
David and I can do work in the background.
Sure.
And then are we meeting in 2 weeks on the 18th?
Yes.
Okay.
That Eric said that he should be available for that one too.
So I'll keep you posted on the HDA progress and whether that'll be in play for July 2nd. And
That's it.
And if we get the nature trail boardwalk proposal back, we may need to vote on that at some point too to be able to move it forward. We can do
Is that a voting topic for us? I do.
to expend funds on a project.
It's already approved.
We made a budgetary request. But exactly, I don't know, I would expect us to need to vote to do a major project like that.
I can remind
You
you.
can
Yeah.
do that. And I think we can vote on individual items without a need. We have certain, my memory serves me about open meeting stuff. If there's like a specific proposal that's
So,
posted.
so just to wrap things up, I will, I'm gonna send an email out to all the commissions so that Eric can also read that memo from, CSWG wetland scientist.
Yep.
My sense is that the consensus in this room is to get the functions and values specific done. So I'll send that out regardless, just so that you have that. Move forward from there.
Okay, should you retroactively post it to the agenda so that because it was talked about and shared in the meeting?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Meeting's adjourned.
3 days.
Oh, are you
Yeah.
guys gonna go do the?
Little reading action. Yep.
Yeah.
Multiple groups have been out there, so I